everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Tutor Chat. We are calling the end to our March Madness of Women's Inventions. Jazzy and I have decided between ourselves that the DNA double helix is the winner. So ta-da, confetti, it wins. All right, so now on to the actual subject of this episode. We had a request about how to deal with difficult students, and we decided to just kind of parcel that into our continuing discussion about how to deal or how to walk students through research papers. So today's theme is tutor horror stories. Basically, what to do when your student comes in and it seems to be an impossible situation. So, Jazzy, I believe you have our first spooky horror story. Do share.
I do. So it was a dark and stormy day. The Wi-Fi was going in and out. I was working with Freddy Krueger, and in a research paper, there's often a lot of elements you want to cover, and it was one of those times where there was a lot to do and less time, and there was a lot of MLA issues. And there were some minor ones like, oh, you moved the period after the citation. But every time I would say something small like that, Freddy Krueger would be like, no, I've always done it like that. I think you're wrong. And so in those situations where you start to get challenged or questions, I think questioned on like your knowledge, there's several different ways you can react, right? Like if it's an opinion thing, I also like to express that, you know what, this is 100% your paper. I'm here to help share my thoughts, but I, at the end of the day, want it to be your paper and you feel proud of it. When it's something like citations, the best thing anyways is that they know how to find the knowledge on that. So if you say, "Oh, it's actually just, the period after the citation," and they say, "No, you're wrong," you go, "Do you want to look it up together?" Like, that's awesome. Let's learn something here together. And yeah, okay, let's go to Purdue Owl, let's go to the MLA handbook, let's go to Scribber. And that's kind of a really good way to handle that like questioning knowledge is like, well, let's go to the source together. So that's my first horror story. And it seems to have happened a few times this semester.
Yeah. And the end of that horror story should be you go to another tutor and complain in private. Like, don't want this student to hear you, obviously. But that's the end of that story.
The
Like,
end.
this
And the
student
clouds
wouldn't
shine
listen to me.
through and the Wi-Fi
Exactly.
came back.
Exactly. Well, my first horror story actually took place on a bright summer day when Dracula came up the stairs. I don't think he had used a computer in in a while. Like, he had just woken up, gotten out of his coffin. So he didn't know how to use a computer, which is, fine. What wasn't quite so fine was that he only had 2 pages of his 10-page research paper done, and it was due in an hour. So at that point, you kind of have to cut your losses a little bit. So, I mean, part of it, you do try, you help them brainstorm and just try to come up with ideas just to fill it out as much as you can. But ultimately, you have to realize, like, don't stress yourself out over it. This isn't your fault as the tutor. Um, so help the best you can, stay calm. Don't scold them, but, also don't stress out.
Very
So,
true.
yes, so that's my first horror story. My second is kind of a similar problem. In this horror story, the Wicked Witch of the West came into the writing center with her entire research paper completely done and sparkling, and she was very clearly very, very proud of it, except it didn't follow the prompt at all. Like, nothing, it had almost nothing to do with it. So she had some time. She had more time than Dracula did. Otherwise, I might have recommended just turn it in, or at least ask for more time. But what do you do when a student has the entire paper written and it's not right? Because obviously, that's a lot of work they're facing, and that's a lot of emotional trauma to know that they have to rewrite the entire thing. So what I try to do is to walk them through this process of recycling, where we identify the parts of the paper that we can keep. Maybe they just need to be moved around or reframed. and try to find as much as you can to keep, because that will at least make them feel a little bit better about, okay, I don't have to trash all of this. So, yes, those are my two horror stories. I believe you had another one, Jazzy.
I did. So this time I was out at sea, shipwrecked, and ran into Ursula. And Ursula wrote a very long, very detailed, passionate research paper that kind of was attacking certain people or groups, or it can be very uncomfortable to read, you know? And in that situation as a tutor, I think it's really important to assess that emotional reaction, you know, if it's something that you strongly believe in and someone's writing against it, and then to start looking at how you can move forward with that as a tutor. So I pointed out to Ursula, like, oh, okay, so you have this idea, like, where'd you get that from? You know, it's like, oh, well, it's my idea. Cool. So in a research paper, we have to support that. So what sources do you have? And she had like underthesea.com, you know, didn't didn't really stand true as a source. So you can start kind of pointing out all of those things and encouraging Ursula to look at the school database. Can we find the same information there? And when you can't, that's kind of a good pivot point to think about like, well, how can we look at this from a different angle or a different lens, or why isn't this working out? And so you're not right away going at them saying like you're wrong, that's completely insensitive and rude. You're more saying, how'd you get this information, and it doesn't really work in an academic setting, and here's why, and here's the logical fallacies that it follows. But at the same time, if Ursula gets hostile or is very defensive, as a tutor, I think it's important to have that support and know that we could call our captains anytime. We can go to other tutors and we can be supported emotionally, because we give a lot of ourselves as tutors, and we do have to read papers that maybe we don't agree with. So in those horror stories, you kind of have to balance that emotional respect for yourself with, how can I step back as a tutor and help Ursula see why this went wrong? So those are my horror stories, and I was rescued, went to land, all is well.
And spoilers, we all lived happily ever after despite all of that. So, in the comments to this video, share us your own horror stories. And remember, don't be mean to the students. They're just, stuck in a tower and you need to save them, or they're lost in the forest and don't know who to trust and they're following the breadcrumbs or whatever. So obviously be kind to the students in your responses, but also tell us what happened and so we can support you the best we can.
I'm excited to hear all of your charming stories.
All right. Well, in the meantime, don't
Don't
forget to
forget to
grow your
grow your
mind.
mind.
Bye.